What's good, team? Welcome to another Small James coding tutorial where today we're going to be talking about the unofficial ChatGPT API. No longer do we have to go into the browser and use ChatGPT's interface for it. We can do it directly from our code using this unofficial API. Obviously, it's just temporary until ChatGPT publish their official API, at which time I will obviously make a YouTube tutorial about it, so keep an eye out for that. But for now, this is a great substitute, full benefits, and at the end of the video, once we've figured out how to use the API, we'll be building a web application, full stack. It's going to allow the user to communicate with the ChatGPT and send responses back and forth and display that information on the screen. So here's a quick demo of the app we'll be building after we've learned about how the ChatGPT API works in our server. So essentially, it's just a food recommendations app. We can click on a meal that we want food recommendations for. Let's say we want eggs and it's vegetarian. We can generate that. That gives us a little loading status, and we send that request. It's specially structured to send to ChatGPT, so it goes to our API and then to ChatGPT, who generates a response for us. We then get 5 different recommendations of recipes that are all vegetarian and include eggs, so that's super cool. And then what we can do is we can click on a recipe that we want to proceed with. That will go to loading, and then we'll actually get a full-on recipe for that meal that we selected. So here you can see that we do indeed get back a recipe for healthy veggie omelets. That's exactly what we selected. Tells you all the ingredients that you need, and then you come down to the directions, which are right here. Instructions, we have all the instructions, with little notes and everything. Don't get me wrong, it's not formatted perfectly. You could easily split up the strings based on new line characters and have that display on the page. Super powerful technology, all thanks to the ChatGPT API. You can go crazy and build whatever interesting applications you want. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and sub, and let's get into it. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we're going to start off in our terminal in a directory of your choosing, and we're going to make a directory called ChatGPT API. Now we're going to cd into ChatGPT API, and obviously this project is going to use Express and npm, so we're going to go npm init-y to create a package.json file, and now we're going to run npm i express to install Express. We're going to run npm i-save-dev nodemon. And now we are going to open that up inside of our Visual Studio Code editor. So here we have all of our code. We're quickly just going to whip into the package.json file and make a dev script. So we're just going to go nodemon server.js. So nodemon is just going to restart our server every time we make changes. And finally, we can create our server.javascript file and initialize our Express app by requiring Express, say const app is equal to, and call the Express method, and finally define our port is equal to 1337. And now we can tell our server to listen at our port and pass in a callback function that's just console's template literal server has started on port, and pass in our port just like that. So now we can run npm run dev, start up our server. We can see that it has indeed started up on server leet. And now what we're going to do is just test that it's working by creating a REST file. Now REST is the equivalent to Postman. You can basically just emulate HTTP requests. For it to work, you will need the REST client Visual Studio Code extension installed. Amazing extension. These are great files, so I'd recommend installing that. Equally, you can do it via Postman if that's your preference. And in here, all we're going to do is define a post route to http://localhost leet 1337/chat. Now we haven't initialized that route yet, so let's just come down here and say routes app.post. We're going to pass in the chat route, and here we're going to say request response, and we'll just say res.send status 200. Now the next thing we're going to have to do to make this server work is define some middleware. That's just going to be app.use express.json so that we can receive JSON inside of our post requests. And then in here, what we can do is say const message destructure message out from rec.body. So over in our test.rest file, while we're at it, we may as well just console.log the message to make sure that it's working. And now if we come into our test.rest file, we can say content type application.json, and here we can pass in a JSON object that has message. So we're matching the key to the key that we're destructuring in our server, and in here we can say hi mom. So let's test if this works. We can see that we get a 200 response back, so that's excellent. And we do indeed console hi mom, so our server is now functional. Now we're at a point where we can install ChatGPT. So this package here, ChatGPT, the link to the repo will be in the description down below. We can install that, and once again, this is the unofficial API. To get that to work inside of our server.js file, we actually have to change our package.json file to a type of module like that, and that's because ChatGPT requires a modular import. So up here we can say import ChatGPT unofficial proxy API from ChatGPT, and now we can make our require syntax still work by importing create require from module. After that, what we can do is say const require is equal to create require and pass in import.meta.url. And so that will mean that our require syntax still works. So I should be able to save that and boot up my server again. And we can see that that all loads perfectly. So now we have all of our packages going. The next thing we're just going to have to do is init ChatGPT. So we can do that by saying const API is equal to new and calling the ChatGPT unofficial proxy API. And in here, what we're going to do is pass it an access token. Now the access token is going to be saved inside of an env file under access token, just like that. And this is a good time to bring up the fact that there is one caveat to using this unofficial API. And that's that your access token will be exposed to the people that run this reverse proxy to make this unofficial ChatGPT API work. Now, it's totally secure. They're not really interested in your access token, but it's just good to be aware of. No negative consequences, but obviously you will use it at your own risk. Not that I personally believe the risk is very high. Obviously, this will not be an issue when the official API is released. And once again, when that happens, I'll be sure to make a video on how to swap it over or use the new one. However, for the moment, we're just going to go ahead as is, and we are going to get this access token by opening up a browser. And we are going to come into ChatGPT. You're going to need to authenticate, whether that's creating an account or logging into your current account. And once you are logged in, you are going to come to the following URL. So I'm just going to paste it in here, and it will be in the description down below, so you can copy it from there. You're going to come into this URL, and that will return a JSON object inside of your browser, the same browser that you're already authenticated in. So I'm going to paste that in here. This will return you some JSON, and inside of there will be an access token. You will want to copy that access token into your .env file. We're going to make the .env file just here, make an access underscore token, and you'll just say equals, and you will paste your token in just here. Make sure not to show anyone this token because obviously it's still private. And yeah, as I mentioned, when you click enter on this link, that JSON will be right in front of you. So I have pasted my token inside of my .env file now. These tokens are valid for approximately 8 hours. However, now we see that we have an invalid token, and that's because we actually have to install the .env package. So we'll install that here, and then we'll just require it into our server .env and make sure that the config method is run. And now these environment variables will work. We can restart our server. And now what we can do inside of our route is we can make this an asynchronous route, and we can say const res API or ChatGPT, or we could just say chat response is equal to await API.send message, and we can send the message from the body. One thing we'll probably just want to do is add in a guard clause and says if not message, we just want to say res.send status 403, which sends forbidden. Even better, we could just say 400. Otherwise, we want to get the chat response, wait for that. And what we're actually going to do now is respond with that text. So we can just say res.status is 200 and send the response, if I can spell that correctly. And that is going to be equal to res.text. Chat response.text. So we can wrap this inside of an object so that it senses an object or JSON. And now we should be able to come over to our test.rest. Here I've changed the message that says, what should I have for breakfast? And we can send that request. The request gets fired off to ChatGPT API. We don't have to be inside of their interface, as I've mentioned. And here I get back a 200 response, as we would expect, and we have our whole response. So this is all from the actual ChatGPT. So it uses real ChatGPT to generate these responses, all sorts of great information. And you can go ahead and have a back and forth conversation. If you wanted to have a further conversation, you could say const chat response is equal to, and I'd probably just make them a let so that we can override them. And I'll just close this. And what you would do is say a wait dot send message, and an example would be, can you please expand on this? Question mark. Obviously all of the documentation is linked in the description down below. But yeah, what we would do is we would pass in a conversation ID, and that is just going to be equal to the chat response dot conversation ID, and then we're also just going to pass in a parent message ID, and that is just going to be equal to chat response.id. So that needs to be a space in there. If you pass in these additional parameters inside of this object as a second argument, then you can have a follow-up conversation. And you just need to, we could do this again and say, I still don't understand, or whatever, and ChatGPT will go and continue to generate these responses. So that's how you would have a conversation. If you really wanted to have a back and forth, you can just track the previous chat response and then, amend or append information to that. What we're going to instead is just stick with this one response here. And at this point, we're actually done looking at how the API works. Super simple. And instead, what we're going to do is build a front-end application around it that uses this API. So in here, what we're going to do is define some more middleware. So this is going to say express.static, and we're going to pass in public as an argument, and this is going to allow us to serve static files from a public folder, and we're going to, inside of that, create a new file called index.html. This is automatically going to be served up at our home route, so just here at this file will be served, so we don't have to make a route for it. And now what we can do in here is just say working, test that that's working. We can come over to localhost 1337, and we can see that that is indeed working. So now that we're in here, we're going to make some changes. So this is our recipe app. So that's all good. We're going to give it some default styling of box sizing, border box, margin of 0, and a padding of 0. And then we're also going to just style the body, give this a display of flex, a min height of 100% view height, a flex direction of column, a background of hashtag 0f172a, and finally a color of white. So if we just save that and reload this page, we get all of that. And in here, what we're going to do is just say, what would you like for breakfast? So that comes up at the top. And so now that that's working, we're just quickly going to come over to Google Fonts, if I could spell that right. And the font that we're going to be using is Poppins. So just here, and we're going to select all of the regular fonts, just like I have here, all the way up to the very bold. So now we need to copy this link tag. So we're going to copy this entire link tag and paste it underneath the title of our app. So just there. And now we can come into our document, and inside of our body, we can just set the font family to Poppins and give it a backup of sans serif. So now if I refresh this page, we have Google Fonts working. So that's excellent. And now we can come up into our app and create a header component. We can create a main component, and we can probably not worry about a footer. And inside of the header, we can have an H1 that just says food recommendations, just like that. If I refresh the page, we have that there. We're going to target the header and give that a padding of, well, actually, we'll probably give the whole document a padding of like 12 pixels. So that'll push that inwards a little bit. Inside of the header, we'll give this a padding of maybe 10 pixels vertically and 0 horizontally. So that would just push that down a bit. We're also going to say display of grid and place items center, so that will center this. We're going to target the header H1 and give it a font size of 1.2 rem. So it's a little bit smaller. We can maybe make it 1.4. And now what we're going to do inside of our main is just say display flex direction column, say a gap of 14 pixels, just like that. And inside of our main, we're going to have 3 buttons, or actually divs are fine as well. And we're just going to say breakfast. The second one will say lunch. And the third one will say dinner. And we're going to put this inside of a section. So this is going to be section 1. We'll probably also give this an align items of center and a flex of 1, so that occupies the entire page. And now if I refresh that, that is what we're experiencing. So now if we just check that this is occupying the entire width of the page, we could say background white. We would expect all that to go white, which it does, so that's perfect. And what we're going to do is just say justify items as well. And we'll just center everything in the page too. So we would expect the sections to all be centered. That's justify content, sorry. So now those buttons are centered. For the section, what we're going to do is also give that a display of flex. So we're going to say main section will display flex direction column. And then finally, the main section divs, what we're going to do is give them a text align center, a border of 1 pixel solid blue. Let's refresh that. So now we've got that. We'll give them a padding of maybe 8 pixels vertically and 16 pixels horizontally. Should blow them up a bit. We'll make sure that they have a gap here of 8 pixels. We'll give them a border radius of 5 pixels, so it's a little bit rounded. And finally, what we can do is we can say main section div hover, and we'll give this a border color of cyan. Perhaps we also just want to give this a cursor of pointer. So here we should just have a little app that has these 3 buttons. Obviously you can style this to what you want, but what we're going to do is we're going to select a meal. But what we're going to do now that we have these hover buttons work is select a meal, and we can do that by coming into the bottom of our document here and adding the script tag. And inside in here, we can create a function. Well, actually first let's define meal. Meal is equal to null. Then we're going to define a function that says function select meal. That's going to take a meal type. And in here, what we can do is open that up and just say meal is equal to meal type. And now what we're going to do is define a second section, and this is going to have a whole lot of our selections, so that should still work for all of this stuff. We will have a div with a whole lot of options, so one might be vegetarian. We'll just do like 8, for example. Let's just save that for a second. This one could be vegan. This one could be like bacon. This one could be eggs. This one could be pescatarian. And the last one could be, I don't know, but you get the point. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to give this one an ID equal first. This is going to be the first selection. This one's going to be ID equal second. We're going to come up here and we're just going to target Second, give that a display of none, so it's not there. Refresh this page, you can see that now it's not there. And what we want to do is on a meal type selection, we want to target that element. So we're going to say const first ele is equal to document.getElement by ID. We'll target first. We'll say const second ele is equal to document.getElement by ID second. And in here, what we can do is we can say first element dot style dot display is equal to none, so that it's hidden. We can say second ele dot style dot display is equal to flex, because it has a flex display. And so now what we would expect is on the selection of this thing, we pass in the meal type, and the meal type gets set, and we can console.log the meal, just like that. Now the one other thing we're going to have to do is just put these on-click handlers on. So here we're going to say on-click equals, and we can just say select meal and pass in, and that should actually be on these divs more specifically. So it'll be on these three. We'll pass in the on-click handler, select meal, and we can just pass in the meal type. So this one is going to be breakfast. This one is going to be lunch, and this one is going to be dinner. So what I might just do is console out this line, just so we can try it a lot of times. We're going to inspect the page, go to the console, we click on breakfast, nothing happens, we click on lunch. Let's refresh that. So we can see that on lunch, lunch gets console, dinner, breakfast, so on and so forth, and we get this second thing displaying. So now if we come in here, refresh that and click brunch, then we get taken to the second lot of options. So what we're going to do next is define another function, and this one is going to be called select options, and we'll just say option. And for this one, we're also going to need a last div down the bottom. So I might just make this a span down the bottom that says generate. So we should expect to see generate show up down the bottom. It does. I might just quickly style that span. There's only one on the page. So we're just going to say background is blue, color is white, and we'll say same border radius as before. Border radius is, we can actually just copy these two lines perfectly. So that should be all the same. If I refresh that page and go there, we have generate. We'll also want that text align, so we'll paste that in there. And what we're going to do is just say span hover, also on the cursor pointer. Cursor pointer goes in there, and then the hover will say background transparent, and I might just also give it this border. So what that's going to look like is when we hover, if I go into a normal screen, we just get this display here, which is, just a bit different. Anyway, back to the moral of the story. So we have this second section that says generate. On these divs, what we're going to do is we're going to have all the selected options. So let's say we just wanted, we'll say let options equals an empty array. On select option, we're just going to say options.push option, the selected option. So that's going to add it to the array. And what we're also going to do is just have a function called color. So what we're going to do in here is we're just going to say const options is equal to document.query select all. We're going to get everything inside of second that is a div. So all of these divs, and then we're going to go options.for each and just take the option, if option dot inner text, and we'll just check if this is in options. So options dot includes the inner text, then we'll set a background color for that element. Now I'm just going to have to rename this to options list because options already exists above, and we want to use this option. So if the option contains the inner text, so if the inner text has been added, then what we're going to do is just set the background color. So we'll say option.style.background is equal to sky blue. So what we'll do is every time we push an option, we'll just call it color. And so now we can come up here and just add this on click. So I'm going to do it to all of them. So we'll say on click is equal to, we'll say, what is it called? Select options, just like that. We can pass in the argument for each of them. So this one is going to be vegetarian. It doesn't matter if it's capital. This one is going to be vegan. This one is going to be bacon. This one is going to be eggs. And this one is going to be pescatarian. So just like that, let's refresh this page, see if this works. You can see that now we have a little selection going. I'm not saying it looks amazing, but it's functional. And now what we do is we're going to click generate at the very end. So here we're going to have an async function that says generate meal options. Just here, we're going to say try and catch block, catch error. If we get an error, we'll just console.log the error.message, just like that. And in here, what we're going to do is say const res is equal to await fetch, pass in the URL, which is http://localhost1337/chat. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say method is post. We're going to say headers and set the content type equal to application/JSON. And then we're just going to say the body is equal to json.stringify and just have the message is equal to the current options. And we'll construct this string in a second. I'll just make sure that message is an appropriate object. So this is going to be our response object. This needs to be inside of an object, just like that. And what we'll do here is we'll say const request is equal to, can you please generate 5 meal recommendations that satisfy the following 5. We can actually be more specific and pass in the type. So we can say meal here, pass in the meal. So it'd be lunch, breakfast, or dinner that satisfy the following requirements. And then what we can do is make a space, end that template literal string, and we can say options. We'll actually just say let. We'll make this a let. Options.for each option. Open that up into a new line, and we'll say request dot is, we'll just plus equal so that it's the self plus the additional string, and the additional string is just going to be the option, just like that. So that's going to add the option. What we could actually do is just console.log our request here, and we can comment this out for a second, and we can just have generate options. We can target, so let's just target up here. We'll say const submit button is equal to document.query selector, and we'll just target the span because that's the span. We can say submit button.add event listener. On the click function, we can pass in our final function, which is generate meal options. Refresh this page, breakfast, we'll select the ones that we want, generate, and we can see that now we have, can you please generate 5 breakfast recommendations that satisfy the following requirements. Obviously we can see that we need a space between them. So if I just add that in and do that again, breakfast, vegan, and bacon, that's going to be difficult. You obviously, let's not make this too hard on ourselves. Now what we're going to do is make this fetch request. The first thing we're going to do in here is set a loading element. So we're going to create a third section, and this one is going to have an ID equal to loading. We're going to have a fourth section. This one's going to have an ID of recommendations, and then we're going to have a fifth section that says recipe. So now what we can do is here we're just going to have a loading text just like this. The recommendation is going to be a whole lot of divs as we just have here. We can sort that in a second, and then the final one is going to have the recipe. So when we click generate options, we want this loading section to be displayed. So we're going to come up here and style these 3. wherever we set the section second, we can actually do the same for loading. We can do the same for recommendations, and we can do the same for recipe, because all of them are going to be hidden at first. And then as we work through the functions, we can obviously do that. What I'm also going to do here is just say, can you please generate a list of, that way it's just going to actually return a list. But the final thing we're going to do is just say, what are we responding? So we're responding with the response just here, and so we can destructure that and just say const response is equal to res.json, and we can await that. So we should be able to console.log the response just here, like so, and see what we get back when we get to the end of this whole situation. Let's give that a shot. So let's refresh this page. Let's say we want dinner, we want eggs, we generate that. We get a bad request because the token is not JSON, and we haven't actually included our request. So we have to have that there. Let's try that again. So we'll refresh the page, restart our server. Breakfast, bacon, generate. It should be loading, so we can check the network tab here. Still pending. We can see that we have our thing, generate a response of all of that. We could also make it on the back end so that we actually console.log the server, but we're not doing that in this case. Here we can see that we've got a response now, so that's super cool. We get a response of, here are 5 breakfast recommendations that include, we have all our list. We can recognize the new line characters, and we can actually just filter out. So that should be fine. What we're looking is 1.2.3.4.5. 5 should be the last one. Let's have a look at the very end. 5. Okay, and now what we can do is with that response, we can generate on the page. So what's going to happen here is we need to come into our index.html. When we generate the meal options, we're going to set loading equal to true. So we're going to say const third element is equal to document.getElement by ID loading. Const fourth element is equal to document.getElement by ID. This one's going to be recommendations. And then the const fifth element is equal to document.getElement by ID recipe. Cool, so these are all our elements. The third one, third alley, is going to be in here. So after the generate options, what we're going to do is we are going to say loading. So we're going to say third alley dot display dot style dot display is equal to flex. We're going to set second alley dot style dot display equal to none. So that will go to loading. When we get our response back, we can say third alley dot style dot display is equal to none again. We can say fourth element dot style dot display is equal to flex. The fourth element is going to need to be constructed. So what we're going to do is destructure all of these options. So we can see the format that it gets back. What we're going to do is split the string. And I think that the best way to do it is to say const meal options is equal to the response, and we're going to split it on the \n character, and then what we're going to do is slice it from the first element. So now that should be all of our options, and then we can say meal options dot for each. We can take a meal, we can open that up, and we can target fourth element dot inner HTML is equal plus equal. So we'll take what it is and we'll add, and we're just going to add a template literal string that's going to be a div. The div is going to have an on click that is equal to select meal. Do we have that already? That's already the top one. So we'll say select recipe, just like that. We'll pass in the recipe. So that is going to be the text in that element. So how we're going to do that is, what we might just do is also take the index, because I think that's going to make it easier. So if we just say I here, and what we're going to do is actually just say meal options is equal to, and define this further up. So we can just say let meal options equal to empty array. Then we assign it. We can access it later, so that's good. We can receive the index. So that's going to have to be a template literal string as such. We actually don't need those little quotes around the outside. And then in here, what we can do is just have all of the text inside of it. So we can just have the meal, and then we can close the div. So after we've set that option, then these should all come up, and then we can do the final step, which is going to be this function that we created here. So select recipe. We're going to say async function select recipe receives the index, and now what we're going to say is const generate recipe is equal to template literal string. Can you please generate a recipe for, and then pass in the meal options at index I. And that should give us a recipe. And then once again, we can just redo this logic just here. We will set loading. So that's third element. We'll have to set the fourth element to none, set the third element to flex, which is going to be the loading screen. Send the res. This time it's going to be generate recipe instead of request. Get the response back, set the third element to none, and now we can just display the inner HTML. So we can literally just say fifth element dot inner HTML is equal to template literal string. We can have a paragraph tag, a closed paragraph tag, and in here we can just render out our response as such and set the fifth element to a display of flex. So let's actually just give this whole thing a whirl. I have no idea if this is going to work. We'll refresh that page. Let's say we want a lunch. We want a vegetarian lunch. Let's generate that. The loading screen works, so that's neat. We can see that ChatGPT is loading our lunch. We now get back a whole lot of options. We get some extra divs as well, which is a little bit annoying. We can select any of them. So vegetarian burrito bowl, grilled cheese sandwich, Mediterranean veggie sandwich. Let's say we want the veggie sandwich because that sounds interesting. We click on that, loading the actual recipe. And now we actually get a recipe back. So 2 slices of whole wheat bread, 2 tablespoons of hummus, quarter cup, 4 chop, place, do all of that kind of stuff. What we could do is just for the directions, separate that into a new tag. You can do it however you want. You could style this. But yeah, that is pretty much it. That is how you can use the unofficial ChatGPT API to create web apps. You know, we've looked at how we can do absolutely everything, so that's super cool. Different post routes, you could do all sorts of different stuff. You could have ongoing conversations. You can see how you can build a front end around it, serve that up, and you could, you know, host this and do whatever you want with it. Anyway, if you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and sub. Super appreciate it, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.